Hey, good day, Internet. Continuing the series of finding when you find your motorcycle is hard to start. We're going to look at the three key ingredients you need to have a functional running motor: fuel, spark, and air. We'll look at air today, and basically it's probably the simplest input of the three. So basically, you're starting at the air filter, going through the your carburetors, mixing the gas, goes into the combustion chamber. You get the big bang and the exhaust coming out the exhaust valve through the exhaust system and out into the atmosphere. So not much to it, but we'll look at a few things that you can inspect if you're having a hard time starting the bike. Now, to start off, there's the preconditions are important. Let's look at if you've had it in storage for a bit and you're bringing it out like a season or longer. Definitely look at the air filter. What I do actually when I store the bike is take the air filter right out, because I have to store it outside where the rodents hang out, and totally fill up the air box itself with little blocks of wood. That keeps them physically out of there because they can't get in there and make nests, and I do that with the battery compartment also. It depends on the design of your bike, of course, too. So that you get that blockage, or you could get that blockage from little mice and chipmunks or whatever getting in there and making nests, actually physically eating your air cleaner and then depositing crap and corruption into your carburetor. So like if you're storing the bike, recommending that you'd stuff up the exhaust pipes too with some steel wool. That'll keep the critters out of there. And if you got a leaky environment, you might want to just physically cover the ends too, so there's no chance of water getting into the exhaust pipe. So if this is a running bike then you haven't just brought out of storage, pull the air filter out and have a look. If it's clogged with oil, you've got another kind of problem. And moving on to that, you check the engine oil level. It in case it could have been overfilled, particularly if you stored it and overfilled it, or it's just been overfilled and that oil has it's worked its way back up through the system, up around the piston rings where it shouldn't be, moving into the air cleaner. So if you got a heavily soaked air filter, that's probably the primary source of where that's coming from, back up through the rings. Now the other worst case scenario is that you've got worn out piston rings, and you'll see the engine smoking. So again, if you're bringing it out of storage and it's smoking right out of storage, I wouldn't panic right away. Just ride around for a bit. The rings will loosen up. There's quite a few rings, if you can see here, in the most designs. It's not just one ring. So driving around will usually free up parts of the motor like that and get things back in shape. Okay, another thing to check if you got the oily air filter is any kind of crankcase vent. More modern bikes are going to have perhaps PVC valves or some kind of scavenging or some kind of sophisticated valve. But check to see if that crankcase ventilation is plugged or non-functional. They can have you can literally have just a pipe going to the atmosphere, or you can have a one-way valve or something more sophisticated. So you check that, because if the pressure is building up in your crankcase, that could press the oil, in a sense, up through the rings and back into the intake. If you got a brand new bike, follow the instruction break-in routine to the letter, because I think it's about 600 to 1,000 miles on a new bike. They tell you to vary the RPM quite a bit. Don't just keep it locked at a certain throttle. Don't use cruise control, all that stuff. So because it wants to seat the rings into the sides of the cylinders, and if that hasn't been done, then you've almost created a condition where you've worn the rings out. They're not seated, in a sense, and you're going to get oil blow-by. Okay, the next thing to check is various vacuum hoses that you may have. More modern bikes, of course, has got more vacuum hoses, and they're probably more related. They're related to the emission control. So that is definitely going to have to require your service manual reference to see what goes where. Sometimes the hoses can get disconnected and then hooked up in the wrong places. It's just sometimes not obvious. So most service manuals have a diagram of how those vacuum hoses should be hooked up. So consult that. So all those things, move on to a proper compression check with a gauge. And I'd highly recommend not using your finger over the, or your thumb over the spark plug hole. Number one, that's, believe it or not, that's pretty dangerous. You could kill yourself because you could get a bubble of air if you have a nick in your finger, let's say, or thumb. You get a bubble of air into your bloodstream and it gets to your heart, you'll die. I did work at a place where we'd be written up for using the compressed air to, put in our coveralls and cool ourselves off. And number two, it doesn't tell you much. It blows your finger off the hole, but what PSI does that equate to? So it's a pretty useless technique when it comes down to it, as well as being dangerous. Okay, another item to check is the valve adjustment, the valve lash, they call it. You can, if you've if you've got no clearance at all, let's say, you can actually have the both valves, the exhaust and the intake, practically permanently open when the lobe comes around. You've got it adjusted so tight that it never really closes. Had this the Yamaha in this video here was that case. It had terrible compression, like 75 psi, and then I set the valve lash correctly, and it went up to well over 120. Now, another thing to check is just mechanical connection of your carburetors and carburetor or carburetors. The throttle, of course. Throttle cable to the actuating rod or lever or whatever, how your machine's set up. I got a view here from the service manual. There's most four-cylinder banks of 4 carbs, they have a physical rod that goes across. So just check to see that's all connected. Sometimes there's set screws that may come loose, and you might have a problem there. Okay, so the next basically mechanical check is to look in the end of the carbs, or put your finger in and turn the throttle and make sure the throttle slide's going up and down. There's a picture here, a cross section of the 20. The right side is your standard carburetor, and the left there is a constant velocity. They're basically the same thing, with a throttle slide that goes up and down to regulate the air that's going in. Now I'll show you here. This is quite interesting. I just found this in the manual I was looking at. What they're showing here is on the bottom here we got the full to wide open throttle, and the different areas where each jet comes into play. So it shows you clearly how they transition from, like, say, idle jet to your main jet through the throttle position. It's quite interesting. So you see how they're layered on each other and they sort of taper in and taper out. It gives you a graphic of the adjustments that should be in place. You can naturally see how any one of these adjusted in the wrong way is going to mess up your acceleration and your idle. Just an interesting little tidbit. For the exhaust system itself, it's pretty much just a pipe that leads from the exhaust outlet to the back of the bike. It's more sophisticated than that, but that's, in a sense, that's all it is. So just remove any obstructions that, or like the steel wool you use to plug up or keep the rodents out in storage, and have a look for dents and stuff like that, obvious things, and just basically make sure there's clean flow in the exhaust system. So with the airflow checkup, it's basically checking for any obstructions and gross mechanical maladjustments kind of thing. It's pretty simple. It's you start at the air filter and work your way through the whole system right to the exhaust. And I say look for any blockages and issues like that. That's about it, and hope that helps somebody out there now, and have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon.